Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's history lesson. My name is Mr. Dixon. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Sabono Discovery Center learners. Today, I'm extremely excited. Like always, we are going to look at an overview of paper one that you are going to write tomorrow. It's pertinent that you have your pen and paper ready because as we will go through the notes, you will be able to annotate what is important for tomorrow's question paper. Very important. Let's go through the instructions first, and then we'll go through how you should answer a source base and how you should answer a essay. And then from there, we will basically conclude the session today. But let's first go through the instructions. So the first instruction is basically it will give you section A and section B. Now, section A consists basically of the source-based questions. So question one, as you can see on the screen, it says the Cold War, the origin of the Cold War. So the focus for tomorrow is the origin of the Cold War, basically. But remember now, the origin of the Cold War is a bit vast. I will be talking about the content later, but very important that you must understand. Question one is the origin of the Cold War. Question two, independent Africa. It's a case study of Angola, basic. Question three, civil society protests from the 1950s to the 1970s. Then it is basically now the USA civil rights movement within the USA as such, basically. Then we go to section B. Section B is question four, the extension of the Cold War, a case study of Vietnam. Question five, independent Africa, case study of Congo. Question six, civil society protests from the 1950s to the 1970s. And the focus here is the Black Power movement within the USA, basically. So there we have it, learners. We have section A, which is 3 questions, section B, which is 3 essay questions, basically. Now the question is, what do you do with section A? What do you do with section B? And this is what happens to both parts now. So on the screen, you can clearly see it says you must be able to answer 3 questions, meaning now not all 3 from section A, not all 3 from section B. This is how you should answer it. When you look on the screen, it says 4.1, it says at least one must be a source-based question and the other one must be a essay question. Then 4.2 says the third can either be a source or an essay question. So when we look at the instructions that has been given to us, it means 1 source, 2 essays, or 2 sources, 1 essay. Let me repeat again. 2 essays, 1 source. 2 sources, 1 essay. And that's how you must answer it. Now, please take note, learners. If you need to answer the 3 questions, you must spend at least, take note, at least an hour per question, because it's a 3-hour paper, so it means 1 hour per question, basically. Let's quickly go how you should answer a source-based question. Now, it's stuff that you're supposed to know. It's stuff that we are just going to go through again. The first one is level 1 question. So what is level 1 questions? It's extractions from the source. Then we find definitions, which is also called concepts. So what happens is with the concepts, you must have studied the concept. Now take note, learners. Extractions will be basically 12 marks, and this is 2, and this gives you the 14 marks at the end of the day. Then the extraction questions, we will go a bit more into detail now. But let's go to level 2. What is level 2 questions? It means interpretation of evidence from the sources, explain information gathered from sources, and you must analyze evidence from the sources. And that gives us a mark allocation of 20, basically. But we'll go more into detail so that you can have a clear understanding the types of questions, the typical questions for level 1 and 2. Level 3 questions want us to interpret, evaluate evidence from sources, engage with sources, why the source is usefulness, why it's reliable, why it's biased, and the limitations as such. Then you must, level 3 questions also comprise of compare, contrast, interpretation of the different perspectives, but it also talks about level 3 questions are also paragraph questions. And the mark allocation here is 16 marks, basically. Then it's important that we understand that level 1 questions have got question verbs and it's got typical questions. And the mark allocation is as follows. 1 times 1, 2 times 1, 1 times 2, 3 times 1. Sometimes this one can be 4 times 1 also at times. But let's look at the question verbs. So the question verbs are certain words that informs us that this is a level 1 question. For example, list, quote, identify, name. That is what we call question verbs for level 1 questions basically. Now, level 1 questions, remember learners, the answer where? In the sources. Remember now, learners, if it's not a definition, the answer will always be in the first 4 lines, basically. Then, what are the typical level 1 questions? What information in the source tells you about? Quote, 2 reasons from the source. What do you understand by the term according to the source? This is what we call typical. This is how it will be phrased. Question verbs is the words. So they use the words like quote, 2 reasons. So it means once you see list, quote, identify, name, then you know it's a question verb. Now, typical questions, level 1 questions is it is how it is being phrased at the end of the day. So that is level 1 question. So now everyone, once you come across list, quote, identify, name, then you know it's a level 1 question basically. What are level 2 questions? Remember now, level 2 questions, it enables you, or you must be able to interpret, analyze, and engage the evidence from the sources basically. The mark allocation there is normally 2 times 2, which is basically 4, or you will find it says 1 times 2 basically. And that's basically when it comes to the concepts. Now, please take note, the concept for level 1 always says in your own words. In your own words means from the dictionary. Then with level 2 questions, the concepts here will basically be, take note, in context of the topic that you are dealing with. Like for instance, if it's question 1, it will say in context of the origin of the Cold War basically. Then what are the question verbs? The question verbs are explain, comment, describe, organize basically. Now remember learners, uh, this is actually just helping us how we should answer the source-based questions basically. Then we go to typical questions. What message does the cartoonist convey? Explain in your own words basically. Why do you think according to the source in your own knowledge basically? So take note learners, it says according to the source in your own knowledge. This is what we call level 2 questions. Level 1 is only according to the source basically. Now let's quickly go to level 3 questions. Level 3 questions carry a maximum mark of 8, which is for the paragraph, and 4 for the normal level 3 questions. Now what are the question verbs? Contrast, compare, comment, justify. That is what we call question verbs basically. Then explain to what extent. We still continue with the question verbs. Explain to what extent. Compare evidence from source 1A and 1B. Comment on the usefulness, how reliable the limitations of the information of source 1B. And then the paragraph is the last one basically, which is our 8 marks. Now let's dwell more deeper into the mark allocation. Remember now, the number in front that you can see it's circled in red, the 1 at the bottom, the 2 is circled in red. So the number in front informs us the amount of responses that you must provide. So when we talk about the amount of responses, we're talking about the amount of answers you must give actually at the end of the day. The number at the back informs us the amount of marks you will receive. When we look at the first one here, it says here 3. You must provide 3 answers, but one of them will be 1 answer. But the mark allocation will be 3 because you must provide 3 for 1. Then the bottom one, it's 2 times 2. But now the front number indicates to us the amount of answers you must give. So the amount of answers is basically 2 answers, and one of them will be 2 marks. So it will give you the 4 marks that you actually need basically. Now remember learners, once you see a mark allocation of 1 times 1, 2 times 1, 3 times 1, it's extraction questions basically. The answers are there basically. But if you know the question verbs, so you read the question properly first and then you go to the mark allocation, and that will guide you basically. Then when you see a mark allocation of 2 times 2, now you must tell yourself this is interpretation and I must analyze this question. So to answer this question, you must be able to have studied your work. If you did not study your work, it becomes a bit difficult to answer 2 times 2 questions basically. Then learners, so we need to have it at the back of our mind. We answer We read the question first, we look at the marker location, and that will guide us how to find our answers basically. Now, what are typical level 3 questions? How do sources support each other? Through compare, and then contrast means opposite basically. Biasness of sources, reliable, how reliable is the sources, usefulness and limitations. These are the typical level 3 questions. So once you see usefulness, once you see reliable, once you see limitations, compare, you are supposed to know that this is a level 3 questions, and you must be able to interpret, and you must be able to evaluate that particular question basically. So let's look at support first. Support, what does support means? It means how does source A support source 1B? Then it gives the topic. This question is basically what does support means. It means how similar are the two sources from each other basically. Now, what do? How do you answer this? You go to source 1A and you find something in that source that supports or says or shows the same thing in source 1B. So when it is shows, it means it's a visual source. When it supports or says, it's a written source basically. Support can sometimes be visual also times, but shows means visual most of the time. Now, how do you write it down? In your answer, you should say the following. Source 1A says there are people using violence, and this is supported by 1B, which says the people are aggressive. So violence, aggressive, same thing. It is similarities basically. So we're looking for similarities, things that are the same. Now remember, now this gives you 2 marks. Now you must go back to 1A. Now you must say again, source 1A says the people are flying in jets. And this is supported by 1B, which says that the people were flying with planes. A jet is a plane. So it does not give the definition, but jets and planes are basically flying in the air. So now you have basically your similarities, your 2 similarities, and that's how it should be. For instance, if in the visual source they show a gun, and in the written source it informs us that people were carrying guns. So now you say both sources informs us that there were guns involved. So that clearly means the word both can be used when the words are the same at the end of the day. Now let's go to contrast. What is contrast basically? Contrast means opposite, two separate sides. So what do you do now? You go to the first source, you find something that is opposite or contradicts the second source. So how do you write it down? You say source 1A says there are planes, and this is contradicted by source 1B, which says there were trucks. So what is a contradiction? Planes and trucks. So now you go back to 1A and you say source 1A says there were guns, and this is contradicted by source 1B, which says the people were using toys basically. So what is the contradiction? Guns and toys basically, and that's how you find your 4 marks. You must go twice back, learners, to 1A. You must go twice to 1B to remove 2 things that are contradicting each other at the end of the day basically. Now, when it comes to biasness, biasness clearly means, learners, it is one viewpoint. So it can be an individual's viewpoint, it can be a country's viewpoint, or it can basically just be an organization's viewpoint at the end of the day. So biasness sources actually provide limited view to something at the end of the day. When we talk about biasness, and then people need to look at the motive of the words being used also. Then we go to reliable. Now, reliable is asking 2 ways. Comment on the reliability, or explain how reliable is the source, basically. There are 2 questions that you must ask yourself to answer reliable questions. Is the source accurate, first of all? Can the source be trusted? If your answer is yes to both, it is accurate, it can be trusted, then very important. Now, this is where you find the answer. Now you look at who wrote it. So now you indicate who wrote this particular, and that is found in your caption most of the time. When was the source made? That is also found in the caption. Then you cannot write there's a date. You must indicate the source was written 19 July 1945 basically, and that is how you should answer number 2 there basically. Why was it created? It was created to show us how they were building the Berlin Wall, basically, or how they implemented the Marshall Plan, basically. So you must be clear. Is the evidence in the source consistent with evidence from other sources? So what happens here is, learners, you look at 1A, 1B, because maybe 1B is maybe being the source that is asking how reliable is the source. Explain the reliability of the source. So now you go to 1A, 1B, 1C, and you mention what is consistent with the other sources, basically. Then we go to usefulness. Usefulness, we need to ask ourselves these four questions, and that's how we will get our answers. Is the source accurate? If there's no date, it's not accurate. So it means now usefulness and reliable are almost asked on the same basis. Does it mean what it says? Can it be corroborated? Is it consistent with other sources? Who produced it and why, basically? So these are the similar questions that were asked, apology, that were asked when you were doing reliable questions at the same time, basically. Then, very important, usefulness and reliable, they ask them, explain how reliable is the source, explain usefulness of the source, comment on how reliable is the source, comment on the usefulness of the source. Then we go to limitations. This kind of question points to the quality of the source. Now, how do we find the answer when it comes to limitations? What do we do when it comes to limitations? So you'll be looking basically at, is the source biased? Remember now, we did biasness earlier. So if the source is biased, now you will say the source is biased because it only gives us the viewpoint of the USA, basically. Is the source reliable? If there's no, remember, if there's no date, if there's no author, if it does not inform us where the source comes from, then take note, learners, then the source is limited, basically, because it can inform us. If it gives us a proper date, then the source is not limited. Take note about it. If there's no date, if there's no author's name, if it doesn't inform us where it comes from, it becomes limited at the end of the day. So I've given you samples of how the answers should be answered, basically, at the end of the day, basically. Then, very important, if the source is not accurate, it means there's no date. If there's no author, the source is not accurate, basically, at the end of the day. And that is because it says here, how is the source limited, basically. So what should you do? You look for the date, you look for the author, you look why it was written, basically. And remember, this is a 2 times 2 mark, basically, at the end of the day. Let's go to the paragraph. So the paragraph question is worth 8 marks. This is assessed using a holistical analytical rubric. The question is phrased so that it is level 3 questions, basically. For example, explain the role, impact, causes, effects, or significance of a particular historical event. The paragraph questions always relates back to the key question. So it means now, when I am answering source 1A, I underline what's answering the key question. Remember, the key question, it's always the word in bold. And then you find question 1, then you find question 2, then you find question 3, basically. So then it's important that you underline when you answer 1A. When you go to 1B, you underline what's answering the key question. When you go to 1C, you're answering what's answering the key question. When you go to D, same story, basically. So once you get to the paragraph now, question now you do not copy paste, you paraphrase. Paraphrase means you maintain the main idea and you remove the words in front and you remove the words at the back. By doing that, and it is what we call paraphrasing now. Then also, very important, learners, that we need to understand when it comes to source-based questions, it is pertinent that we know the content. If we don't know the content, it becomes difficult to actually answer them. We can clearly see that question 1, it's the origin of the Cold War. It basically starts at the end of the Second World War. That's how it's been introduced, basically. Now, why did the Cold War develop, basically? In 1943, the big three, we can see the big three on the screen. This is Churchill, Britain, Roosevelt, USA, and then Stalin, Russia. So now the big three met in what we call the Iran, that is the capital of Iran. They agreed that Stalin now would go to the countries in front of the USSR, the Soviet Union, and he would repair them and he would not turn them into communist countries. So that was the first conference in 1943. Very important that you understand, in 1943. Then in 1945, in February, the big three met again in Yalta, basically. So in Yalta, it was agreed upon that Germany would be divided into 4 zones and the capital would also be divided into 4 zones. Why? That reason, because they did not want the Treaty of Versailles to happen again. So what is the Treaty of Versailles? The Treaty of Versailles was signed after World War One, where Germany was forced basically to repay all the countries involved in World War One. And in the same year, in July, August, they met again at Potsdam. Now, at Potsdam, Churchill was no more, Roosevelt was no more, but Stalin was the only one left. But take note now, Churchill was replaced by Attlee, USA was replaced by Harry Truman. So Harry Truman became the new president because Roosevelt passed away during February and July, basically at the end of the day. So what transpired there is that uh, the conflict escalated, basically. That was basically the big spark of the Cold War. Now, remember now, you must know the definition of the Cold War. The definition of the Cold War, it is basically a war of words or of ideologies between communism and capitalism without any physical contact. That is the definition of the Cold War, basically. So what transpired there is Stalin now indicated unto the other two leaders, Attlee and Harry Truman, that Russia is demanding basically that Germany must pay reparations in the sum of 20 million to repair Russia as a country, basically. Harry Truman declined it, basically. So Stalin was not happy because of that decline. Then he objected. He said, why must you occupy the capital? Because the capital was in the Soviet zone. Remember now, Germany is divided into 4 zones. So in the Soviet zone was the capital. We understand politics. You control the capital. You basically control the country as per se. So what transpired here is that Stalin was not happy because they divided the capital Berlin into 4 zones, and it was in his zone also, and because of the money that you could not get. So what transpired is that Stalin now was furious, upset. So he turned the countries in front into communist countries. Then he also tried to turn Greece and Turkey into communist countries. But what did the USA do? They went to Congress, and Congress actually granted them the Truman Doctrine. So the Truman Doctrine provided 2 things. It provided financial aid and military aid as such also. So it's important, learners, that we understand what was the Truman Doctrine all about. They provided military aid to protect the country against communist onslaught. And they provided military aid because remember, it was now the World War II, and most countries in the world were damaged, basically. Then that was the first containment policy. So the second containment policy was called Marshall Plan. So Marshall Plan was only for European countries as per se. And the Marshall Plan only provided financial aid to the European countries. But the Soviet Union also had containment policies called Cominformation. Cominformation clearly means they sent spies into those countries that were communist countries. And if they discovered that you want to become a capitalist country, you and your family were basically wiped out. And that is what we call communist information. So it's called Cominform. Then they also had what we call Molotov Plan or Comcon. So Comcon was similar to the Marshall Plan, only for European countries, basically. So it was basically to lure Western European countries to become part of communism. Now, please take note now. Uh, Winston Churchill basically went to the USA in Massachusetts, and he basically announced and he said Stalin has created an iron curtain now. And this was basically after Potsdam. So he said that Stalin created an iron curtain by making those countries in front of his country communist countries. So those countries they were basically called the Iron Curtain, the satellite states, the buffer zone, basically protecting Russia from any form of invasion. So that is basically what we call the containment policies. But at the same time, in 1949, there was a crisis in Berlin also. So what was the crisis? Stalin blocked off all roads leading to Berlin. And what transpired is, as he blocked off all roads leading to Berlin, please take note, that lasted for 11 months. The West, so the West are the capitalists. The West are the countries that are part of democracy, basically. So the countries of the West, and South Africa was part and parcel of that also. They transported from West Germany into West Berlin, and they dropped off basic necessities for 11 months. And the amount of flights that actually was flying for the 11 months was 220,000 flights, basically. So after 11 months, Stalin decided, I cannot shoot down the planes. It will result in a hot war. So there was another crisis in 1961. Stalin passed away and Nikita Khrushchev became the new leader. And more than 3,000 people basically went from from East Berlin into West Berlin, and that's how they got out of Berlin, basically. Because why? They were desiring the lifestyle of the people in West Berlin, basically, and that is what we call the Berlin crisis. But in 1961, Khrushchev decided to build a wall to stop the people from moving over to West Berlin, basically, and to join the capitalist countries at the end of the day. But take note, there were military alliances also. We call them military wings. So NATO was the military wing of the capitalists, basically. And also PEC was the military wing of the communist countries, basically. So it's important that we understand that part. And this is what we did now, learners. I gave you the content. Let's quickly go into further detail how you should answer these particular questions, basically. So take note, now you know the content. So the first thing you will be confronted with when you look at the question paper is the key question, basically. So what is the key question? It is the spine of the question that you are dealing with, basically. It basically serves as the central focus of the entire topic at the end of the day. It tells us what examination bullet is being examined on, basically. Then it also helps to understand what to look for in the sources, basically. It also will also helps you learners to ensure that you know exactly where to find certain answers and what to look for, basically. Then most importantly, the key question is the paragraph question at the end of the day. And when I spoke about the paragraph, it was a clear sign that it is the key question, basically. When reading the source, candidates must keep in mind what the key question is. So like I said, when you deal with 1A, 2A, 3A, you underline what is answering the key question. When you go to 1B, you underline. When you go to 1C, you underline what's answering the key question at the end of the day. Now, very important, learners, how do we improve our performance with source-based questions? Because a lot of learners are finding it difficult to answer source-based questions, and that is merely because of the fact, first of all, we don't know the content, we didn't study the content, we didn't practice old question papers also. So it's important that we need to understand when we read the source. That is the first thing. When we read the source, we need to understand. We read the source first. After reading the source, now we go to the question. We don't answer it yet. We go back to the source. So that is one part how we should perform well, basically. Then you must understand, learners, that you have been taught in grade 8 and 9 about primary source, secondary source. Now remember, now you don't write primary source, you don't write secondary source, basically. You when it comes to is the source primary, is the source secondary, you're supposed to know already at this point in time. Then you must contextualize the source at the same time also. So what is it to contextualize the source? You must consider the historical context, the content basically in which the source was created. What evidence or circumstances influence how to use your analysis and how to interpret the content that is being provided through the source. Then examine the author who created the source, what is the perspective of the sources also. So the content analysis, what is the main argument of the message that's being provided basically. So we need to look at the language and the tone that's being used, and we must pay close attention to the language being used at the same time also. Then we must be able to know how to answer compare, how to answer level 3 questions in general basically. But learners, very important, like the last point says, use knowledge of historical evidence. That means you must have studied the content basically. Now let me give you some exam tips quickly. Exam tips for answering source-based questions as follows. Practice past question paper. So what you should do now today is you must know already which questions you are going to answer. So now if you decide you are going to write 2 essays, so you're supposed to know your essays off by heart, basically, and we will talk about the essays afterwards. But you should know which source base you are going to answer exactly, basically, and you should practice old questions based upon that particular question that you are going to answer. Very important. Old question papers helps a lot. Basically, it makes you understand the language and the tone that is being utilized. Use highlighters or pencils to highlight important facts as you read or as you are studying basically. Always consider context. When and why was the source created? Balance your response by discussing both strengths and limitations of sources. Ask questions. Very important. You ask questions when you answer the question yourselves also. So what is the purpose of the source? Who is the intended to basically? Then determine how reliable is the source, consider the reliability, and there are also limitations and strengths basically also. So the key question, here's an example about a key question. How did the implementation of the Marshall Plan address the economic and political instability in Europe in the 1940s? Now that is the key question as per se. Now after the key question, now you find source 1A. Now remember, now the caption is always on top. So we read the caption. The following source explains the destruction left by Second World War in Europe. By the end of the Second World War, much of Europe and Asia and parts of Africa lay in ruins, destroyed, combat, bombed, and flattened cities and towns, destroyed bridges and railways, and scorched and countryside. The war had also taken a staggering toll on both military and civilian lives. A shortage of food, fuel, and all kinds of consumer products persisted. And in many cases, take note, in many cases, worsened after peace was declared basically. War ravaged Europe, and Japan could not produce enough goods for their own people, much less for export iron ore. In addition, take note, learners, in addition to the toil in human lives and suffering, take note, countries spend more money on Second World War than in all previous wars put together. By 1945, exhausted countries faced severe economic problems that frustrated reconstruction efforts, inflation, debt, most owned by the United States, trade defects, shortfalls, balance of payments, deficits, and depleted low gold and dollar supplies. Basically, the devastated countries needed gold or US dollars, only currencies considered to be as good as gold, to pay for important and make, please take note, make debt payments. However, both dollars and gold were alarming scarce in the war scarred countries. Many countries, take note, many countries retreated from the market. Communist Eastern Europe abandoned it altogether. The world's multilateral financial and trading systems face a serious threat, basically. Now, remember, we said highlight. So now we can see the key words are being highlighted as you are reading through source 1A, basically. Let's go to the questions of this particular source. So now, remember now, learners, that the source has been highlighted. So the highlight will give you a clear indication, basically, what you should answer, basically. If you are not highlighting, you underline them, basically. You take a ruler and you underline them. Now let's go to the first question. Analyzing source 1B. The poster named "We Build a New Europe" depicting the Marshall Plan. The abbreviation for the Marshall Plan is ERP, was created by Austrian Kurt Kripke. It shows Europe's wartime destruction with a burned tree, the promise of recovery with the growing leaves, basically. So now we can see the growing leaves are the green ones, basically. And this is the burn tree at the end of the day. Now let's go to the first question, 1.2.1. What message is conveyed in the source? Very important. 1 times 2, basically. So you must now say what message is conveyed in the source. 1.2.2, comment on the significance of the white doves in the picture, basically. Why white doves? What does it symbolize at the end of the day? Look at the mark allocation, 1 times 2. 1.2.3, why do you think the tree trunk is covered with the American flag, basically, which is this part here? It's covered with the American flag, basically. Then mark allocation, 1 times 2. Let's go to the answers quickly. 1.2.1, interpretation of evidence from source. It says that the USA is rebuilding Europe with the Marshall Plan. So it says, what do you think about the source? The USA is rebuilding Europe with the Marshall Plan. Economies of the war-torn countries will start to grow. 1.2.2, it's a level 2 question also. The Marshall Plan will bring peace to Europe. Countries benefiting from the Marshall Plan will be protected by the USA, basically. 1.2.3, the Marshall Plan was a USA plan for European recovery. The funds for European recovery came from USA, basically. Now let's go to question 2 now. So how did the civil rights movement, it is basically question 3, not question 2. Please take note, learners, it is question 3. How did the civil rights movement achieve voting rights for blacks in the USA in the 1960s? That's the key question. So let's go to the content of this particular question. So the content is basically just, now the content is not an overview. Overview means just a brief description or explanation for this particular topic. So we need to look at the reasons and origins of the civil rights movement. Very important that we must understand that the civil rights movement started with the Rosa Parks incident. That's where it started. We know about the Linda Brown issue before that, but it starts with the Rosa Parks incident. What was that incident, basically? Remember now, in the 13 southern states in the USA, they still had what we call Jim Crow laws. Those were segregation laws, similar to apartheid laws, but it was called segregation laws. So what transpired is they had these laws and they were called Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow was not the name of the law, it was called Black Codes. Jim Crow was just a song that was written how African Americans are struggling in the USA as per se, basically. Now, very important, learners, that because of the Jim Crow laws introduced in the buses, African Americans had to sit at the back of the bus. But what transpired here is Rosa Parks was sitting in the African American section. So when the white section is normally full, the African American sitting first, they had to stand up. She refused to stand up. She was arrested because she was violating the black codes, basically. And after when she was arrested, basically, Martin Luther King became the spokesperson of the civil rights movement. He grew people together and they protested, basically, not to ride the buses for 13 months, basically. So basically, this started now in 1955 and it moved over to 1956. So the Supreme Court ruled that the buses must be desegregated. Now, desegregated means joined together. Segregation means separation. Desegregation means joined together, basically. Then the impact of Martin Luther King was quite significant because he was the one that organized basically that protest for 13 months at the end of the day. Then there was other forms of protest also, which is called basically the sit-ins. So the sit-ins was where basically 4 African American students went to a Woolworths lunch counter in Greensboro in North Carolina in the USA. They were refused service on the first day. The second day, they returned with more students. So the sit-ins did not only end with Woolworths in Greensboro, but it spread through the rest of the country and the southern states, basically. Very important. It did not only remain in Woolworths, but it remained in theaters, in libraries. So in libraries, it was called library inns. In theaters, it was called theater inns. In beaches, it was called beach inns. In churches, it was called nil inns at the end of the day, basically. Then it also moved. Then the protest became successful because why? Now businesses were desegregated, basically. Then the other campaign was what we call freedom rides. So 13 multiracial students travel from the north of America into the south of America. When they got into the south of America, very important, one of the buses was set alight, basically, and that was broadcast live on television. The General Secretary, Robert Kennedy, intervened in the process and desegregated interstate buses, basically. Then we move over to the Birmingham campaign. Now, Birmingham was the heartland. It was basically the headquarters of the racist white people, basically. Then what transpired is that you will notice, learners, I'm saying racist white people because not all white people were racist, basically. And very important that when Martin Luther King came there, he trained the people how to satyagraha. Now, what is satyagraha? Satyagraha means to protest in violence, and satyagraha was a word used by Mahatma Gandhi. So Martin Luther King Jr. adopted Mahatma Gandhi's approach of non-violent protest. So he trained them how not to be aggressive towards the paratroopers, which were the police, and basically the army as per se also. And that was a huge success because children began to join the Birmingham campaign also. And prisons were overcrowded because children were part and parcel of that also. So business owners decided to desegregate businesses, basically. They opened fountain drinks to all races, basically. And that was also a huge success. Now take note, learners, sit-ins, freedom rights, Martin Luther King was not involved. He supported him from a distance. But Montgomery bus boycott, he started this whole process. Birmingham campaign, he was there. Then we move over to the Lincoln Memorial March. At the Lincoln Memorial March, it was arranged by Philip Randolph, and about 200, more than 250,000 people from all races and creeds joined and converged together in Washington, and they were marching from a particular point to the Lincoln Memorial, and this is why it's called the Lincoln Memorial March, basically. The aim for this march was basically to address the issue of jobs, where African Americans were hired last and fired first, basically. And it was also to address the celebration of the abolition of slaves in 1863 because it was already 100 years. Then what transpired is this thing changed where Martin Luther King actually made his famous speech, I Have a Dream. And because of that, not only the speech, but because of the Lincoln Memorial March, it forced President Kennedy basically to announce the Civil Rights Act, basically. But it was not signed off by John Kennedy, but it was signed off by President Lyndon Johnson because John Kennedy was assassinated after he made that announcement of the Civil Rights Act, basically. Then, although the Civil Rights Act was signed, African Americans could not vote. Why? Because they first had to write a literacy test. If they failed the literacy test, they couldn't vote. And only 2% of African Americans in the 13 southern states were actually educated, basically. So, what did they do? They started off basically. Now, take note that the Civil Rights Movement was both African American and Caucasian. Caucasian means white people. They started what we call summer schools, basically. And during the time of the summer schools, that there was some protest, and Johnson and Jackson's grandparents were shot, and he tried to protect them. And as he was trying to protect them, the police shot him also. And because of that incident, Reverend Lewis arranged a march from Selma to Montgomery to march against the vote now against the literacy test that they had to write. So on the 7th March 1965, they came to the Edmund Bridge in Selma. They were informed to turn back. They refused to turn back. And as they refused to turn back, learners, that was called the Bloody Sunday because they refused to turn back. So the police started to attack them. And as they were attacked, basically on the 9th of March 1965, Martin Luther King led the march. He came to the Edmund Bridge. When he came to the Edmund Bridge, the paratrooper said he must return back, and he turned back basically. So 19 March, the Supreme Court ruled that the march from Selma to Montgomery is now legal now. And what transpired there is they marched from Selma to Montgomery, and about more than 20,000 people joined the march. When they reached Montgomery, President Lyndon Johnson signed what we call the Voters' Right Act. And this is now basically, learners, the content of the civil rights movement. Now let's quickly go to the source. Please take note, it has been highlighted already. So source 3A, even after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the act that ended racial discrimination forbid discrimination in voting on the basis of race, effects of civil rights organizations such as the Southern Christian Leadership Council, the SCLC, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, to register black voters met with fierce resistance in the southern states such as Alabama. But the civil rights movement was not easily deterred, discouraged. In early 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC decided to make Selma, located in Dallas County, Alabama, the focus of a black voters registration campaign. Alabama Governor George Wallace was a notorious opponent of desegregation, and local county sheriff in Dallas County had led a steadfast opposition to black voter registration drives. As a result, only 2% of Selma's eligible voters, about 300 out of 15,000, had managed to register to vote on communist doctrines, basically. Now let's go to the questions quickly. The first question is, define the term civil rights in your own words. Now remember, if there's a definition, the answer will not be in the first 4 lines, because now you must answer the definition first. So 2.1.2 will be now in the first 4 lines. Take note of that. The first answer will always be, but if it's a definition, it will not be in the first 4 lines. Then 3.1.2, name the civil rights organizations that encourage the black voters to register. 2 times 1.2. 3.1.3, quote 2 reasons from the source that resulted in only 2% of eligible black voters registered to vote in Alabama. 2.1.1, 2 marks. 3.1.4, why do you think it was important to get as many blacks as possible to vote, to register to vote, basically? Let's go to the answers. 3.1.1, remember, own words level 1 question, basically. Take note, learners, own words level 1 question, basically. So this is from the dictionary. Rights that are enjoyed by all the citizens. Take note, learners, concepts, the answer never in the sources, never ever in the sources. Rights that are enjoyed by all citizens, personal rights protected by the Constitution. Any relevant response. 3.1.2, name the civil rights organizations that encourage the black voters to register, meaning extraction, basically. Southern Christian Leadership Council, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Let's go to the next question. Quote 2 reasons from the source that resulted in only 2% of eligible black voters registering to vote in Alabama. Basically, it's an extraction. So it says, quote 2 reasons from the sources. Alabama Governor George Wallace was a notorious opponent of desegregation. The local county sheriff in Dallas County had led a steadfast opposition to black voter registration drives, basically. So they prevented them from there. Then 3.1.4, why do you think it was important to get as many blacks as possible to register to vote? Level 2 questions. Why? Now you must be able to analyze this particular question. The answer is as follows. To show that contrary to the views of the segregationists, black people were interested in voting. Increase in the number of black voters would win some rights for the blacks. Interest of the black people would be catered for. Any other relevant response for this particular answer? Now let's quickly go to topic 3, which is question 3. And we are still continuing with the sources. So now let's analyze source 3B. This, I'm reading the caption. This photograph depicts the state troopers charging on the marchers with billy clubs during the Bloody Sunday. Remember the Bloody Sunday, 7th March in Selma, Alabama in 1965. We can see the paratroopers being aggressive and violent. We can see how the paratroopers is falling with these people, how they are aggressive basically. Then let's go to the answers that the question and answer at the same time. 3.3.1, what messages are conveyed in the source? So now it means interpretation. You must be able to analyze this. State troopers, now you must say what you see in the source. State troopers attacking marchers with clubs, marchers running away without fighting back. Remember Satyagraha, civil rights movement, a peaceful march turning into a bloody Sunday. Any other relevant evidence that you can see there basically. 3.3.2, comment on why the troopers reacted the way they did to the marchers. Another level 2 question. They were following orders by the governor. They were against integration, supported segregation. They were racist, basically. So that will be the answers for this particular question, basically. Now let's go to the next one. Explain how reliable this source would be to a historian researching the struggle for the civil rights movement in the USA, basically. Now let's look at, because it says explain how reliable, basically. The source is reliable. You don't get an answer when you write that. You get an answer if you say the following. The picture is a primary source taken during the event, basically. So the picture is a primary source taken during the event, basically. Bloody Sunday is corroborated by other sources. So it means the other sources are also talking about the Bloody Sunday, basically. Any other relevant responses, basically. So learners, very important that we understand how we should answer the source-based questions, basically. Learners, let us quickly go for a break. On our return, we will be completing with the essay questions. Welcome back, grade 12 learners, to today's history lesson. My name is Mr. Dixon. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education, collaboration with the Sabono Discovery Center. Learners, the first part of this lesson, we dealt with how you should answer source-based questions. And now the second part is how you should answer essay questions as per se. But very important, before we go to the content, let's quickly go to how you should answer them, basically. Uh, Remember, learners, that essay questions are asked in three ways. What you see on the screen, it is not in chronological order, but it is just provided for presentation purposes. So the first one that you see on the screen is critically discussed. So critically discussed, when you take the stance, approve or disapprove, basically. Then the second question is, do you agree with the above statements? So the stance you take is one can agree, one can disagree. The third question is, explain to what extent, to a less or to a greater extent, basically. So learners, these are the three ways how they will be asking the questions. Remember now, section A has got three questions, question 4, 5, and 6, basically. Now, once you see the three questions, you must know that critically discussed, do you agree? They normally give a statement. And they give the statement, then they say critically discuss. They give the statement and they say, do you agree? But when it comes to explain to what extent, they say explain to what extent, then they ask the question in the same instance also. So it's important that you understand that part. Then when it comes now to the start of the essay, the first paragraph is called introduction. So in the introduction paragraph, there must be three phases. There must be three things, basically. The first one is, what is the direct response to the question? It means, what is your stance, basically. Then the number two is why you took that stance. It means you must give two reasons, or say two reasons or one reason, but let's stick to two reasons. Give two reasons why you took that particular stance. Let's leave one out. Let's move to two or sometimes three also. Then number three is the line of argument. Now you must indicate the line of argument that you are going to follow with the rest in the rest of this particular essay, basically. So it's important, learners, that you understand that when you start your introduction, there must be three steps. And the first one is the stance. You can see on the screen to agree, to disagree, basically. Then to a large extent, to a less extent, basically. You can say, when it comes to agree, you can say, it can be agreed upon, we can agree, but you never say I. And you never say, I approve, I disapprove. You say it can be approved upon or it can be disapproved. So these are the stances you must take for the three different questions, basically. Then step two, reason. Like I said, the reason is the content. So you must know the content to provide the reason, basically. So two examples of the reason. Then three, orientation. Which content will be utilized to answer this particular question? Now, the body. Remember now, it's introduction, body. Then we find your body must be, it must have relevant factual information, basically. So it must be relevant and it must be factual. And you must utilize the Peel method. So the Peel method creates now what we call the line of argument for your answer. That is when you begin to argue different paragraphs that is answering the key question. Then the essay must be, the body must be in a chronological and coherent manner. Take note, we cannot write 1960 first, and then the next paragraph we write basically 1945. No, first 1945, then 1960, then 1970. That is what we call chronological order, basically. Then what is the Peel method? So the Peel method is as follows. The P means point, the opening statement that you're making. The first E means the explanation that you are providing for the point that you have just made. Then you must provide examples, basically, or evidence for your point that you have made. Then you link it back now to the to your stance or to the next paragraph, basically. So the link it is to the stance or to the next paragraph. This is what we call line of argument. So the Peel method creates the line of argument, basically. Now let's go to the content of question 4 first, basically. So when I look at the content of question 4, basically, it says it's a case study of Vietnam. So we first look at 1957 to 1965. what transpired from 1957 to 1965 is a struggle in Vietnam between South Vietnamese army and the Vietcong, basically. Who was the Vietcong? The Vietcong were the rebels within South Vietnam, basically. So it's important that we understand in 1954, there is now a background paragraph. In 1954, Vietnam was divided into North and South. North, communist; South, capitalist. The South, they had a corrupt leader, Nong Dinh Diem. The North, their leader was called Ho Chi Minh. So the North was supported basically by the Chinese and the Soviet Union, basically, and the South, they were supported by the USA, basically. So they promised there would be an election after 1954, never election in South Vietnam, basically, and that actually, uh, and that was basically not well founded with the National Liberation Front. Take note, National Liberation Front, the political party, the Vietcong, were the military wing of the National Liberation Front. Very important that we know that. So what transpired is that, so the USA now sent what we call military advisors and also military weapons also to fight off the Vietcong, basically. So the military advisors was to train the South Vietnamese army, the ARVN, to fight off the Vietcong, basically. But what Kennedy also did was, it was basically to prevent the domino effect, meaning if Vietnam becomes a communist country, Laos, Cambodia would also become a communist country, basically. So Kennedy started what we call the safety village policy, which was to isolate the Vietcong from the peasants, basically. But the peasants were the Vietcong, so it was not successful. So 1963, Kennedy was assassinated. Lyndon Johnson became the new president. So the war in Vietnam's view began to change, because Johnson believed that to win the war in Vietnam, let's send multiple troops. So Congress first denied that request, but when a military ship was torpedoed in the Gulf of Tonkin by a North Vietnamese ship, what transpired basically is Congress agreed and they signed off the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, basically. So by 1969, there were there was basically more than 500,000 troops already in South Vietnam, basically. And what transpired is the Americans were used to conventional warfare, and the Vietcong used what we call guerrilla tactics at the end of the day. But very important, the USA started off basically with Operation Range Hand, where they introduced Operation Rolling Thunder, where they were bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Remember now, the Ho Chi Minh Trail came from North Vietnam into the neighboring country, into South Vietnam, basically. So it went into Laos, into Cambodia, and then it went into South Vietnam. So they were shooting the trail, basically, meaning shooting the neighboring countries at the same time also. But it was not a success, although they dropped more bombs than in World War II. So it was not a success. They couldn't deliver a knockout blow against the Vietcong as per se, basically. Then the USA went on to what we call, they were basically spraying Agent Orange and napalm gas on the vegetation to unravel the leaves to find the whereabouts of the enemy. And that within itself created animosity and hatred in the hearts of the people, because now the agricultural side now was destroyed, and it also had negative effects on the children as per se, basically. Then what happened is that the Vietcong had a surprise attack in 1968, basically, on the Americans and the ARVN as per se. Remember now, at the end of January in Asia, they celebrate what we call the Tet Festival. So during the Tet Festival, there were numerous amounts of funerals, and they were carrying the weapons within the coffins. And as they were carrying the weapons within the coffins, they actually captured about 80% of South Vietnam towns, and including the capital Saigon also. So that within itself created a fear in the hearts of the American soldiers. And because of that fear being created in their hearts, the tactics that was utilized by the Vietcong was, it was hit and run. They created booby traps. So that within itself created more fear. So the Tet Offense created fear. The way the Vietcong attacked the Americans created more fear, and the Americans were not used to the climate and the conditions because they were young and inexperienced soldiers as per se also. So Congress now begin to turn against the war within Vietnam, basically. Why? Because the students were beginning to protest that the war was unnecessary. Why is America getting involved? Basically, at the same time, the Black Panther Party was also fighting against the war within Vietnam, also, where they did not want black people to be part of that war. Then, by saying that, as Congress began to turn, Congress refused to fund the war. Then uh, President Lyndon Johnson did not stand for re-election. President Richard Nixon became the next president, and he introduced what we call Vietnamization. But remember, I'm just giving an overview of the content that you must know for tomorrow. And President Richard Nixon introduced Vietnamization. Vietnamization was to for the Americans to train the ARVN, which is the South Vietnamese Army. And gradually by 1973, there was a ceasefire. By 1975, uh, the Vietcong actually captured the entire South Vietnam. 1976, Vietnam became a communist country. That's an overview of the content of Vietnam. Now, that is what you're supposed to know for tomorrow when you go to the different bullets, basically. Now, let's go to question 6 quickly. Question 6 is black power, basically. So let us just go through the question of black power, and then we will basically, so the black power, basically, it is important that we must understand the origin and the background why the black power came into existence. Very important. Stokely Carmichael played an immense role when it came basically to the black power. So it's important that we understand the role of Stokely Carmichael, why he was involved, Malcolm X, why he was involved. Now remember, now Stokely Carmichael, after the James Meredith incident, he was arrested. After his arrest, he started saying black power, black power. So what transpired is that he joined what we call basically the Black Panther Party. So the Black Panther Party was not started by Stokely Carmichael, but by Shirley and Newton, basically. So I'm just giving the surnames of the people. Surnames is what we're actually looking for always, basically. Then started by them. What did they do? They created a 10-point program system. But why was the Black Panther Party started? It was to protect African Americans against police brutality and white racist people, basically. Then the 10-point program was basically to provide feeding schemes before and after school, to provide literal classes, after school classes, basically, to provide medical facilities or clinics, as per se, and also to actually introduce what we call a neutral system, not capitalism, not not communism, but a socialist system, and that created an animosity and fear within the minds of the white people, basically, because now the FBI zoomed in to the Black Panther Party, as per se, and the FBI created used division so that the Black Panther Party cannot operate successfully. And the 10-point program was also that black people must not be part and parcel of the war within Vietnam. That's the Black Panther Party. So Malcolm X was arrested as Malcolm Little, came out of prison, joined in prison. The Nation of Islam became the most profound speaker of the Nation of Islam. So I'm just giving an overview of the content of question 6, basically. Then then you went to, but before you went to Mecca, we need to provide background to Malcolm X, basically, what he stood for. He was against the fact that Martin Luther King had and was working in conjunction with white people. He feel that black people must work on their own, and this is why it's called black power, basically. He wanted black people to unite. He wanted black people to not work with the white people, as per se, also. But it was very contradicting, basically, because most of the stuff that they got, they received from white people at the end of the day. But Malcolm X actually believed that the white people were called blue-eyed devils, basically. He believed that there was no need to ask the white men anything because of how they treated African Americans in the USA. He also had certain sayings by saying the ballot or the bullet by any means necessary. So these were the cliches that he was basically using. But things turned basically for Malcolm X when he went to Mecca. Mecca is a place where Muslim people go for a pilgrimage, and Mecca you saw white and black people live together and work together at the same time. Came back and informed Nation of Islam, let's do what Martin Luther King is currently doing, working with the white people. And by saying that, he was expelled, started his own organization, assassinated by the Nation of Islam members. Then after that, the riots broke out in the northern part of America. In Los Angeles, riots also broke out. So when riots actually broke out, President Lyndon Johnson sent a commission, and when he sent the commission, basically, the commission found out basically that African Americans lived in poor conditions. They didn't have proper employment, and schools were not adequate enough for them. So the commission now brought that finding to President Lyndon Johnson, and things began to improve. African Americans improved their lifestyle as per se. The schools were improved. African Americans were now allowed also to create their own universities by with the support of the American government as per se, basically. Then they started to believe that black is beautiful, and they started, the dress code also began to change at the same time also. So that is an overview of the content. Now let's look at the question quickly provided. Explain to what extent Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael were successful in instilling black pride among African Americans in the 1960s. Use relevant examples to support your answer. Let's look at the introduction. To a great extent, Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael were successful in instilling black pride among African Americans in 1960. This part here, learners, it's what we call our stance. The green part here is our reason. Both emphasize racial pride, economic empowerment, and the creation of political and cultural institutions. The following paragraphs will be explaining. So this is our reason, and this is our orientation. So very important that we understand the three parts our introduction should look like. Let's go to the conclusion quickly. So the conclusion is as follows. In conclusion, now very important that you pay attention what I'm about to say. In conclusion, to a great extent, Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael instilled black pride into African Americans. Basically, we write in conclusion because we are ending off. We must say in conclusion by ending, by summing up. But we reverted back where? To the introduction. So we took what we had in the introduction, and we are ending it off by re-emphasizing why we said to a great extent, basically. Then the reason, we can see it's the same reason utilized in the introduction. We are using it now again in the conclusion, basically. Now let me read it. It emphasized racial pride, economic empowerment, and creation of political and cultural institutions. So now we can see the same reason we utilized introduction, we utilize in the conclusion. But now this part is not in the introduction. They created an African American into believing that they need to be proud to be black, basically. Now, learners, this is how you must write your introduction and your conclusion. So I've given you the content. I've explained to you the Peel method. At the same time, also, learners, I explained to you how you should answer a source-based question. So, learners, good luck for tomorrow, and please ensure that you go through old question papers, previous question papers of previous years. Go through them, practice them. It will do you good at the end of the day. Your essays, you must know them off by heart. But if you know your essays off by heart, you must be able to produce a line of argument within those essays. Learners, thank you, and see you next time. Bye.